Okay, so we talked about the 4 types of tissues. Can somebody remind me what 4 types of tissues we were talking about?
The nerve tissue, the muscle tissue, the epithelial tissue, and the connective tissue.
Okay, so yeah, so those are our 4 types of tissues. So nerve tissue, that's going to be responsible for the development of, you think about anything with the nervous system, right? So your brain, your spinal cord, your nerves. Your muscle tissues, muscle, right? Your cardiac muscle, your smooth muscle, your skeletal muscle. Your epithelial tissues are going to be basically the lining of your guts and all of those hollow places that you have. So epi kind of means like upper layer, right? Epithelial, right? Okay, and then the connective tissues are like those things that are kind of connected. So that's like your tendons, your bones, your joints. Yes, joints, exactly. Yep. Okay. Okay, so again, we're back to that embryo stuff, right? So from those ectoderms, right? Those ectoderm cells. So those guys are going to give us our skin. They're going to give us our nerves. They're going to give us our pigment. The mesoderms are going to give us our cardio muscle, our skeletal muscles, the tubule cells for the kidneys. They're going to give us our red blood cells and our smooth muscle cells. The endotherm, endo meaning inner, ecto kind of meaning outer, you know. So those guys are going to give us our lung, our thyroid, or like our gland tissues, our gland, our pancreatic cells, stuff like that. Okay. So, and so if we kind of think of it, the endotherm is going to be kind of all those internal organs like your digestive tract. So like your internal your intestines, right? So it's going to make up like your intestine parts and your glands. Okay. Okay. So when we talk about these tissues, there are 2 types of tissue, right? One of them is, 2 types of tissue membranes. So we have what we call the connective tissue membrane, and then we have the epithelial membrane, okay? So anything that kind of makes slime, mucus, right? So that's going to be your epithelial, right? So that's going to be kind of like in the case of our skin, because then our skin gets a little clammy and sticky from all the sweat and stuff like that. So that would be an example of that. Let's say if we stuck our tongue down our throat, the mucus on our tongue, right? So that would be epithelial, right? And then we have what we call connective, right? So that connective membrane isn't as slimy as in the case of our epithelial. So then that's going to be like dealing with things that are connecting together, right? So some of those tissues that are connecting together. It's not going to have that sliminess, but it's going to have that jointness. Okay. So this kind of breaks it down to a more detail. So we have major, so we have connective, and those guys can be broken down further. So take a look here. These guys here, and see, sorry, this here, this here, all of these guys fall into the epithelial. And then this guy here, the joints, connect, right? So that's involved in the connecting of things, right? And so cartilage, right? You guys heard of cartilage and stuff like that?
Yes.
So the membrane associated with that cartilage is considered to be the synovial membrane. The cutaneous membrane is just basically our skin. The serous membrane is just like the cavities and how those cavities are connected to each other. So that will be, again, like our lungs, our intestines, and how the two intestinal tissues are associated with. Okay. And then, of course, we have the mucous membrane, stuff in our mouth, our throat, saliva, where saliva is being generated, our private parts. Okay. So why is it necessary to have these membranes, like particularly say the mucosal membranes? Why do we need, let's say, snot being made?
I would say for lubrication, like you don't want dry things rubbing against each other.
Okay, so lubricants. Okay, so that's viable. Yes, lubricants. Anything else?
Not
So
off the
that they
top
hold
of my head.
together.
What was that?
So that they hold together.
So they hold together. So does, let's say, snot really hold things together?
Like
It's
keeping
sticky.
Would it be when you have you're trying to your something or
So we're talking robot. All I called it, would it be, and then I can understand anything after that. So membranes are responsible. So get back to what is it? As Lucinda was saying, so membranes are responsible for holding things together. But like say those mucosal surfaces, right? So the purpose of that mucosal membrane is basically for secreting stuff, right? And so that's one of the major things. So why do we need to secrete stuff from those membranes? Why do we need to secrete stuff from our nose? But somebody said for lubricant, you don't want things rubbing up against it. So yeah, lubrication is part of the reasons why you see two tissues are secreting things. That makes sense. And then but like our nose, what do our nose do? And what is it?
It stops us from taking in any, I guess, like dust or pollen.
Ah, that is good. So your nose secretes snot and that mucus as a result of trying to protect it. So it actually will be sticky, right? It's kind of like a fly trap or something. So like you said, it stops that dust and that pollen from being taken in, right? So things that could be bad to us or bad for us, viruses and stuff like that. So it's like acting as a form of protection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so a lot of the mucosal surfaces, they secrete stuff as you said, lubricants, form of protection, and then just general, I guess, defense, right? So your mouth, for instance, actually has these proteins called mucosins. That's what causes your spit to be sticky and everything like that. Its job is to basically capture viruses, bacteria, and stuff like that, so you don't sit there and digest them, or that they don't invade the cell, okay? So it actually serves as a surface, a protective surface, okay? So let's talk about the types of cell junctions, okay? So we have a few. Okay, so first off, why do we need junctions? Why do we need cell junctions? What are the significance? see if I can get better pictures of these next time. Anybody?
Oh, when I hear the word junction, it kind of just reminds me of function.
Function. Okay. So you're saying junctions have functions?
Yeah, and are able to move your joints.
Okay. Okay, so let's think about it. So you have two cells that are next to each other, right? And junctions, if we think about a junction is like a form of connection. Is that right? It's way of
That's right.
connecting two different things, right? Okay, so we have what we call tight junctions, right? So a tight junction is just basically junctions that kind of adhere two cells together. Okay. We have what we call gap junctions, right? So again, you're adhering things together, but in this case of the gap junctions, you're kind of closing gaps between things. You're using something to close this gap, okay? And then we have what we call anchoring junctions. Anchoring junctions is where you basically allow other things to kind of connect to it, okay? So the Desma zones basically is an example of an anchoring junctions. Adherens, another type of junctions. Adherens are just things that adhere. So these proteins that are involved in things that are sticking. Okay, and then we have the Hemodesima zones, which basically means that they're taking up only on one side. Okay, so you have one side where these things are connected. So you guys can kind of see them here. So the reason why we have junctions, why do we have cells connected to other cells? And these junctions allow these cells to do what to each other?
Communicate.
Communicate. Yeah. Okay. So junctions will allow signals to be transferred from cell to cell, like directly, right? Rather than the cell secreting it and then it's taking it back in. So these guys are like direct connections to each other. Hey, you guys, I need to tell you, you need to stop growing because you're in my space, right? So they send signals to each other to say, hey, dude, wait a minute. This is my space. This is not your space. Stop growing. It's getting out of hand. You're growing too much, right? So in that context, you're using the junctions to sit there as means of communicating. It's also a means of, as you said, making connections between cells. Keep these guys kind of, in a sense, together, right? And communicating. Okay, so our epithelial tissues, so there's, so did you guys how many of you guys took anatomy? First off, start with that.
I took anatomy.
You took anatomy? So you remember the histological component of it? Where you have to look at the different slides and you have to say, okay, so is this a squamous tissue? Or is this cuboidal? Or is it, do you remember that? I guess not. Okay, so there are different types of epithelial tissue, right? And some of them are going to be very simple. Some of them are going to be like single layered. And then other ones are going to be more complex, several layered. Okay, so these guys, as you can see here, simple, right? So we have two forms of squamous. So we have the simple squamous epithelial, single layer, nice, beautiful single layer. And they're kind of flat looking, right? And you guys will be looking at these under the microscope in the microscope lab. You guys see that one, which I haven't officially uploaded. Yeah, no, maybe. Yeah. Okay, you guys are, whew, it's a rough day. My other morning class, man, I must be pretty rough on them during the week or something. They're just like, eyes were like this big. And they were just kind of looking at me like, kind of like you guys are looking at me right now. So excited. What can I do to get you excited about this stuff? Okay. Well, we have one that looks like a cube, right?
Yes.
Cuboidal, right? So kind of makes sense. It looks like a cube. So it's nicely cube shaped. Looks beautiful. So we have the simple cuboidal epithelium, right? And then these guys are stratified, meaning that they're strapped. right? They're strapped on top of each other. They're layered, okay? So we have the columnar, sorry, meaning they're in columns, nice long columns, right? So these guys are, again, simple. So they're all nice single layer. These guys are stratified, and these guys are pseudo-stratified. So they kind of look like they're, because they're not perfectly aligned, right? They kind of look like they're stratified, right? Because they're not perfectly aligned, where all they are just, they're really simple. They're only one layer, but they're not these perfect columns. They're not nice uniform columns. Does that make sense? You see the difference between this guy and this guy?
Yes.
And do you see the difference between this guy and this guy?
Yes.
Okay, so now if all of the epithelial tissue kind of comes from the same lineage, the same originating cells, how do we differentiate between the two? Anybody want to take a guess?
Between which two, Dr. Henry? Sorry.
Like these guys. So I have these cells, right, under certain circumstances, and then I have these cells under other certain circumstances. Like for instance, these guys here, these guys are found in our small intestines. Okay, and where we may end up with, let's say, things that are a little more complicated that are found in, let's see, say these guys here are found in like mucus secreting cells. Okay, so how do I end up with these guys in my small intestines and these guys in my mucus secreting cells? Or say like my tongue or something like that. Anybody want to take a guess? Now, you don't have to be specific, just generally. We're talking globally because this is what we're talking about right now. Things globally.
Because you have a bunch of cells that all those cells make tissues around your body, so something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So you're saying that we have a bunch of cells, right? So in theory, all of our epithelial cells come from one lineage, right? So what tells it to be, okay, so I'm going to be a tongue cell, and you're going to be an intestinal cell. What regulates that thing? Does it just know? Is it a random? It's like, hey, we're shooting craps today. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, I got intestinal. Yes, that's good. I'm happy. Is that how it works?
No.
Okay, so how does it work? So think about what you talked about. What do you think is going to be involved in this process?
Communication.
Communication, right? Okay, so we're talking about cellular communication, right? Right.
Yes.
So that cellular communication plays a part into these lineages. What type of tissue you're going to form, right? So
yes.
What molecules are we going to be using for that communication?
The cell-to-cell junction.
So the cell-cell junction is going to send those molecules, but what molecules are we using? You guys are getting there. We're getting there. Let's take a moment. The coffee must be kicking in now, right? think about what are those biomolecules, those macromolecules that we talked about. You know, there's like, that was what, a week ago? So long. What helps you decide your fate? Okay, I'll give you this, right? Because maybe we didn't make that true connections, right? So you guys remember those things called proteins?
Yes.
Okay, so protein serves as some of these markers or these signaling molecules, right? So there's certain proteins that'll sit there and tell this cell, hey, dude, you're supposed to be an intestinal cell, so you need to become nice and lean and long and like a columnar, right? And then it'll tell the other cells that, hey, you want to be stratified and you're going to be like tongue cells, right? So you're going to be stratified and people. Okay. Okay. So those proteins help decide those fates, right? So they're actually being signaled, they're being told their fate. And that is controlled, you know, as your mom is helping you develop and everything like that. She's sending out these proteins to sit there and let you know, hey, this is going to be your head, this is going to be your tongue, your skin, this is going to be your, so it's helping those cells sit there to decide during development. But depending on the levels of proteins that are being pushed out, then those things are going to help you make those decisions. Sometimes they'll actually be sending out RNA signals, right? The levels of RNA, and the cells will be taking up those RNA that says, okay, so you need to start making yourself into cuboidal, stratified cuboidal epithelial, and you need to make yourself into simple columnar epithelial, right? And so that RNA is being occupied, that RNA is then made into protein, and then those proteins start sending those signals. Like, okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to grow a little bit taller. We're going to be sitting there, be nice and lean, and things to that extent. So these signals are going to be your biomolecules. So it's going to be either your RNA or your proteins that are going to sit there and tell these cells what they need to develop towards. Okay, does that make sense? So have you guys heard of growth hormones?
Yes.
Okay, so some of your growth hormones, all your growth hormones are proteins that bind to certain receptors to cause those receptors to bind, right? And so we know that the addition of certain growth hormones could actually cause you to start building more muscle, right? Because, you know, you've heard of those athletes, oh, he was taking this synthetic growth hormone, right? You've heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, and they were saying, or you'll hear about a lot of people more recently, they'll taking it for like to try to prevent aging. They'll take another type of growth hormone, right? Because they know that it activates certain pathways in the cell lineage cycle, right? And it causes those cells to say, oh yeah, you're still young. You need to be doing this, and you need to be making more muscle and stuff like that. So those cells say, okay, so we need to start making more muscle cells. We need to be more like this. We want to be more fibrous, and so it makes those distinctions based upon those signals that are being given. Okay, so this part of regulation, right? We have what we call in our body these checks and balances that are going to be occurring. That all has to do with physiology. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, but do you guys also understand how it's important to understand how that membrane plays a part in that, right? Because we talked about the membrane of the cells, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the membrane of the tissue also plays a part in that as well too. Okay, because certain things have to get passed and have to go through. So there are going to be certain elements that are going to help capture what we need to capture. So we had talked about in terms of things as protection, but also in terms of transport of certain items that we need to use the signals for later on too. Okay. Okay, so these are goblet cells. This is just a nice little picture showing you our columnar epithelial cells in the lining of the intestines. And And these cells are known for producing large amount of secretions. So they secrete mucus, okay? And so if you kind of look at it, so these are vesicles that are basically have mucosin in it, and mucosin is what is made up in our mucus, and these vesicles are being excreted out. So you can kind of see all the stuff that you guys learn at a cellular level is now going to be acting as like a tissue. So all of these cells are going to be acting together to be secreting all of this mucus, sit there and keep that part in line. We want our intestines in line, so as you were saying, we don't want it to sit there and rub together, right? We're also going to be using it sort of as a protective means so that it's not being invaded by things we don't want it invaded by, because we use our intestines to sit there and absorb foods. And so we're using it to stick the stuff that we want, and then also make sure that the other stuff don't go through and cause problems. Okay. This is not the best image. So I'm going to do a better job at getting some better images for you so you guys can kind of see. So this is kind of going to give you locations where you can find these various tissues, right? And you guys kind of need to know this because it kind of plays a part in function. It'll start making sense. Like for instance, if you take a look at this guy, the simple skirmish shells, these guys are going to be basically, they're going to be on the lungs and like the lining of the heart, right? And it's not going to be too complicated. They're going to be associated with blood vessels, things that are kind of basically that are going to be kind of thin, right? And then that also kind of already have a little bit of a layer of protection independent, right? So we'll have our blood vessels, we'll have our lymphatic vessels that are going to be in there. So like our lymph node tracts and stuff like that. Okay. And so these guys are going to be like in ducts and glands. Okay. So, and these guys are going to be involved in secreting, you know, and also like kidney. These guys also are going to be involved in secreting, but where did we see these guys last? Oh my gosh. Where did we see the simple coronary epithelial? We just talked about it.
In the digestive system?
The digestive system. Yeah, exactly. So that's something like that. So we're going to have that, you know, so it's able to secrete large amounts of mucus, and then also we'd be able to sit there and use it as forms of digestion, slow digestion. I mean, a slow absorption. Okay, so as I was saying, these epithelial cells, they serve functions, right? And that's what we want to kind of pay attention. And their organization helps us in terms of understanding how those functions are served, okay? And so what I'd like you guys to know is be familiar with the epithelial, and then kind of give me the location, and then also functions. We're concerned more so about that function, okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. How are we doing on time? We're doing pretty good. Okay. Okay, so we have exocrine, exocrine I know I could get it out. Exocrine glands. Okay, exo means what to you guys? Exo, what does endo mean? And then if anybody says marijuana, endo.
Endo is inside.
Exo, and
Exo
endo.
would be outside.
Outside, okay. Okay, so exo, like if we, exocytosis, that means we're secreting stuff outside. Endocytosis means what?
Inside.
It means inside, right? So exo meaning out, endo meaning in. So exocrine. So what do you think that means?
inside. Um,
So exocrine. So what do you think we're going to be doing? Are we going to be taking things on the inside, or are we going to be taking things outside?
outside.
Okay. So an exocrine gland is responsible for, we're talking about secretion. So when we talk about these, we have endocrine glands. And we have exocrine glands, right? So endocrine glands so they secrete our hormones. And these hormones are going to be taken up, spell that, they're going to be taken up by other cells to tell cells, hey, dude, stop growing. Or let's see, we need to sit there and change the blood sugar level, right? So when things are being taken up, right, that's where these guys are. Things that are going to be kind of pushed out and stuff like that, like your sweat, your mucus, right? Things that you're probably not going to take back into the body. Like, so for instance, we develop spit, tears, things like that.
Okay.
Are you guys there with me?
Yes. So anything liquidy coming out of your body.
Yes, that's not going to come back in. I mean, although kids will have the bad habit, you know, when you spit, you're supposed to, the reason why we make saliva and stuff like that is to kind of get it out of us. The reason why our nose runs and it runs out, because it's coming out of us, right? So those are examples of things that are coming out of us, right? Pus, right? You guys, like when you get a sore and it's all pus, right? That stuff that's coming out that we're not expecting to come back in. We don't want it to come back in, right? So those guys, the guys that make those are exocrine glands, okay? The guys that make things that are going to be coming in, like our hormones and stuff like that, that cells are going to be collecting, those are endocrine glands. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so of course, we have several types, right? And then depending on the types that we have, it kind of helps us function and things like that. So in the case of our exocrine glands, so this here basically shows you all the different types. So we have this guy's, I apologize. This guy says simple duct. Okay. And so, and then these guys are called compound ducts. So compound ducts, if you kind of take a look at their origin, so like our mammary gland, which is basically milk production, right? So you guys can kind of see the complex structure of it. It's more compound rather than our simple. Like these guys, you basically have a pinch. It's just like a little pin, or like a bobby pin, right? So yeah, like a pin structure in this case. So that's a simple alveolar gland right there. These guys are tubular because they just form nice tubes. So this makes this guy here basically is like that pinch structure. So that kind of bobby pin at the end where you have it nice comes together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then these guys are tubular, right? So just simple tubes. Okay, so you have two forms, and these guys here, again, simple. This one guy is branched. This guy would be like a simple coiled. In other words, it just forms a nice little coil. This one would be a simple branch. Okay. And so this guy here, these guys are like our tongue. Oops. Or our esophagus. These guys are going to be our sweat glands. So this would be, it's called Merocrine. That's our intestinal. Our subcutaneous gland.
Is that like where the pimples form?
Can you repeat that, please?
Like where pimples would form?
Yeah, exactly. So that's where we're going to get our pimples and just oils from our body. Yeah, so, like you said, pimple. Yeah. Okay. So these guys they're basically found when we're in early development. So they're not going to be found in adults.
So it's almost like that soft spot that the child has.
Yes, that is always secreting the oils and stuff out of it. Yeah. Okay. So mammary. These are salivary glands and respiratory, the respiratory passage. So basically our saliva along our not our esophagus, but our respiratory tracts, and then our pancreas. And then these guys are basically our mucosal glands in the mouth. Okay. So there's like those cheek parts where you get a lot of, like in the corner. Like, do you guys, have you ever played with, use your tongue to play with your cheek areas? So like up in that upper corner, you get heavy saliva. And there's like these little lumps on the side. So take your tongue and then stick it up in the corner of your mouth. Do you feel those two structures on both sides of your cheeks? It'll be right in this area.
Yes.
Okay. So those two structures, that's basically those structures that we're talking about in your mouth, right? So they're going to be compound tubular, right? And so they're producing like large amounts of saliva, right? Okay. How are we doing on time? We're going to get through this. Let me clear. Okay, so then in terms of our endocrine, right? We have I should say, in terms of our sorry, just that general secretion. So we have Merocrine secretion, right? And so then that's basically, you have the vesicles that are going to be coming up, they're going to be going to the Golgi apparatus, they're going to be going to the secretory vesicles, and they're going to just basically be secreted in small little, well, the vesicle is going to open up and let all of the inners go out, okay? And so in this case, this cell remains completely intact. Apocrine, basically you're going to get kind of like a pinching off of the cell. So again, your secretory vesicles are going to be moving. They're going to move up here, and then this whole thing is going to kind of pinch itself off. Okay, and then that is going to be used as a form of secretion. So apo, because you're basically taking a whole portion of it. So you're taking an apical portion at the top. So help us remember apo, so apocrine. And then in the case of holocrine secretion, so these guys are going to form like little
Coral reef.
it looks like reefs, but what it is like the cell, basically the cell is dying, right? And it's in the process of dying, so it becomes more fragmented, right? And so it's kind of like shriveled up, and so this part is just basically cell death, and then it's just going to be secreting everything that it could possibly secrete out. Okay, does that make sense? So holocrine is when you're getting that cell death, and the cell is kind of just packaging up what it can package up and just to send out before it kills over. Okay, so it's kind of like, so you know, somebody who has like, they know they have a terminal form of cancer and stuff like that, and they just start giving away everything, right?
Mm.
So it's kind of like that. So the holocrine is kind of like that individual who's like, they know they're on a deathbed, there's nothing they can do, so they're giving up all of their worldly possessions to everybody. You know, girl, you have this, you know, because I'm not going to eat where I'm going. Okay.
So they're releasing it?
Yeah, in this case, so but they're releasing it kind of like as fragments. So the cell is kind of being packaged up and released as the cell is dying. So you could have long, it's not quite like this part that's being pinched off, because this cell is still alive, right? It's still living, it's just pinching off part of the cell to kind of just deliver huge messages that aren't readily available to be secreted into the system. Where this guy is, okay, I'm dying, let's package up everything because we're just trying to get rid of as much stuff as we can, and maybe somebody can make use of it. Okay. So these are basically our oil glands. We had talked about them. The succubus gland. I'm having trouble with words today. And so again, you had made a reference to the pimples. These are the ones that are going to be producing all of those beautiful oil glands that produces the pimple bumps that we get on our skin, on that surface, next to our nice hair follicles. Okay. And then that often will overproduce when we're going through puberty and we're really starting to just get our hair coming in. And so you can kind of see their location compared to, like, as in the case of the hair follicle. So you can imagine, so somebody who has extra oily hair, so you'd assume that they would have a lot of these glands associated with their hair follicles, right? So these guys, they're going to be holocrine. So holocrine, what is the result of holocrine again?
The dying stage.
So they're in the dying stage, okay? So in this case, so a lot of that debris and everything is, and the oils that are associated with it are a result of it dying. So it's packaging up a lot of the lipid structures that are in the cell, and then it's using that to kind of get rid of things. So. And I'm kind of thinking about you know, as you're developing as a young person, you're starting to develop, and your hair is starting to come in and everything like that. So you're getting new growth of your hair, and then but you're getting these old cells that are kind of arising to the surface, and they're producing tons and tons of oil, right? And they're helping you cause those pimples. So in that case, you're getting a lot of that those old baby cells that you were having, and now you're getting the new cells, those new young teenage cells that are popping in. And so it kind of makes sense as to the dynamics of it, right? Yes, no, maybe? Okay, so back to the grind here. So we have connective tissue, right? So this is basically kind of an organization of connective tissue. You guys can kind of see, so the adipocytes, you know, those are kind of like fat cells. So in this case, we have a little bit of fat cells. We have our reticular fibers up here. We have the mesosin channel cells. We have the elastic fibers. We have the collagen fibers, and we have the fibroblasts and the macrophages. Okay, so we know we've talked about macrophages before. We know exactly what they're there for, right? So, but these are all of the components of a proper connective tissue area, right? So it's kind of made up of all these different types of cells. Okay, so the tissue is not going to be a unique cells. It can actually be cells that are coming together to serve a function. In most cases, our tissue is made up of different cells that work together as a unit to do a certain type of function for that particular tissue. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And so in the case of connective tissue, if you see a lot of these guys are these fibers, right? Collagen fibers, your elastic fibers, your reticular fibers, right? And so because they're involved in that connective component, right? Because they're involved in that, right?
Yes.
So these are adipocytes. So again, your fat cells. So their job is basically lipid storage, right? So they're going to have a lot of fat that's going to be involved in that storage. So we can imagine some of those glands having some adipocytes in them because it had a lot of oils stored up in it. So here, this is showing you that little dark spot that represents your nucleus. And then, of course, you have mostly fat, nucleus, and a little bit of cytoplasm. So you guys can see the dark structure for the nucleus right here. And then all of this haze stuff, that's going to be your cytoplasm. Now, all of this here is fat, right? So these cells get pretty big, right? And so, but it's just all they do is store fat. So like all my pudge on my tummy. So I have a lot of adipocytes that have a lot of fat storage in them, and they can get pretty big in terms of fat storage as well too. So does that make sense? So we have adipose tissues is considered to be loose connective tissue. So in other words, they're not firmly connected. They're kind of like loosely connected to each other. So you don't have a lot of those fibers and stuff that are working through them. They kind of add as adherence molecules or to kind of keep it together or keep it tethered. And you can kind of see that in the structure here, right? So you just basically have the fat cells that are just kind of interacting with each other here. Where in the other case, right? So here, where you can see you have a lot of the fibrous components that are kind of connecting all of the other components, kind of keeping it kind of tethered together. So can you see the distinction between the two? Yeah, no, maybe. So here, you don't have those components. Okay, so in this case, this guy is loose, and it has, again, very little extracellular matrix. Mostly what you see is the fat, very little cytosol or cytoplasm, and then, of course, you're going to have your nucleus. Okay, so reticular tissue, right? This is also going to be loosely connective, but what's kind of holding it together is going to be those reticular fibers. Okay, so you have the fibers acting as support, and then, so this is often for like some of your soft organs, kind of keeps it together, tethered together a little bit more than what we had with our adipose tissue, but it's still kind of loosely connected because the only thing that you're having it holding it together are those fibers. So, how are you guys doing so far? Is it a lot, or is it you guys got?
Some of the image sound familiar to anatomy that I was
Anatomy.
taking that semester.
Okay, good. That's good to know. So when we talk about these fibers, so the fibers themselves, they're proteins. They're made up of protein, collagen, and everything that's a protein. The reticular fiber is also made up of protein, right? So, in particular, like reticular fiber is actually, it's like collagen in a sense. And okay, so fibroblasts. So fibroblasts here are basically a cell, and they're long. There's those long cells. So here you can actually see the nuclei in the fibroblast itself, right? So they actually show you the nuclei, and this is what it, the picture, what it looks like. This is what it really looks like. So you guys can see the nice little nuclei that are forming there, and then you can see the strains of collagen fibers in there. So these guys are pretty dense. So they're not like loosely connected. So these guys are going to be pretty regular dense associated. So this guy has irregular dense. So these guys are also fibroblasts showing, but you can kind of see that, like, look how smooth and organized these guys are in terms of their density, where these guys, you don't have those nice, smooth, and nicely oriented fibers. And so they're considered to be irregular in that context. Okay. And so here, your collagens, they're forming like bundles. And so they're kind of like, you're getting bundles forming. So these huge chunks of collagen fibers there. Okay. Where these guys, you have these nice strands of collagen. Nice parallel, organized, and then these guys are like meshed and woven together. Okay. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. So we have cartilage. You guys have heard of cartilage before, right?
Yes.
What is the function of cartilage? Where's a lot of our cartilage located at?
Is it like the bone area?
Okay.
Protein?
So, well, cartilage is actually, it's a combination of cells and also your collagen fibers. And so basically cartilage is a cell type, right? And so think about for those who have taken anatomy or who've had surgery, right? So when we're flexing and everything like that, and you're right, associated around bones, but usually they're associated where those bone joints are at, right? Are you with me?
Yes.
So like on your knee,
So they connect the
right?
bones.
Yes, exactly. So they're where the bones are connected. So they serve a couple of purposes, right? So one of them is kind of like a support purpose, and the other part of it is kind of like a lubricant type of purpose, because you have two bones that are there. If you didn't have that cartilage there, they would actually be rubbing right against each other, right? So like on your knuckles, right? You have cartilage in your knuckle joints, right? So between those joints, you have cartilage that is going to be there. Okay. And so cartilage, again, is going to be their cells that are there that kind of serves as like a lubricant and a supportive structure. They're connecting the joints together and allowing that flexibility. Okay. So
is it possible then to lose cartilage?
yes, I've actually, in both of my knees, I've actually had to, they cut out the cartilage in my knees. And so you get some growth, right? But as an adult, we don't get as much growth as we did when we were a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't fully replace itself. And so once it's gone, and over time, the cartilage, those cells start to die, and then you literally will have bone rubbing against bone. So often people have knee surgeries and stuff like that as a result of that.
Does it, because I remember back like in grade school, they'd be like, you need to drink your milk so you have those strong bones. Is that the milk? Does the milk help with that, or is that just?
Well, of course, milk provides you some of those amino acids, so it provides you proteins that you can break down and use for that. So it does help with that, and that mainly is that vitamin D that helps you with the whole bone process of what's it called, osteocytes being produced, that helps keep those guys up and going. So, but it's not necessarily for the cartilage. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't necessarily help in the case of the cartilage tissue, those cells. So it's just unfortunate that you're given so much cartilage, and then where it's located, after you get that early development and stuff like that, it just starts decaying over time. So you guys notice, how many of you guys are getting older?
I think.
Anybody getting younger?
No.
No.
Okay, so do you guys get up in the morning and you're like, oh my God, I'm so stiff. Oh, you can hear your joints popping and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
some of that popping is a result of you're getting air in those joints, because where it used to be cartilage, you're now getting that air, those air molecules that are starting to fill that space, right? And so you get that popping and that stiffness going on as a direct result of that. Okay, so you have three types of cartilage. So you have your hyaline cartilage, you have your fibro cartilage, you have your elastic cartilage. So your elastic cartilage is going to be the parts that are going to be helping with the flexing in the knee joints and stuff like that. The fibroblast cartilage, that guy is going to be part of the compression and absorption. So also you're going to find it in your knee. So like when you jump down and you land on something, so that compression component, right?
Yeah.
And then, and just some of that flexibility is going to be that hairline cartilage. And so that's going to be your flexibility. That's called, as I said, excuse me. So that's the one that we mostly associate with, some of that flexibility that is happening here in our joint tissue and stuff like that. But you have all of these components that are going to be located in a lot of places, because like I have a tendency, like you jump off of a table. What happens when you jump off a table and land on your feet?
Well, now that I'm older, well, it hurts.
Yeah, it hurts. But when you're a kid, it didn't, right?
No.
Right? Because you had a lot of this to kind of deal with that. But over time, what happens is we start killing those cells because we're not as active with them and they're not being reproduced the way we want them to be. And so when we jump off of the table as an adult, we get all of that stiffness and that hurt. And then the next day we're like, yeah, what did I do yesterday? Right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so blood is also, it's considered a connective tissue, but it's fluid, right? So in this case, because we know that blood is always circulating and stuff like that. So what is the difference between an erythrocyte and, let's say, a lymphocyte? Erythrocytes do what as they develop? So they're blood cells. Do you guys remember? We talked kind of a little bit about it last time when we talked about the cell specific.
Transport oxygen?
Yeah, it is. So erythrocytes are responsible for providing our oxygen, right? So what do they do? How do they modify themselves to be able to hold more oxygen or hold more hemoglobin? Anybody?
Blood cells?
They're blood cells, yeah, but what do? They do something that's very unique.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, do you remember?
So
Remember. I may have to hear it again.
Okay. So blood cells basically gets rid of their nucleus entirely, right? You guys remember that? So it's able to sit there and hold more hemoglobin. And so then that way you can get more oxygen in it. So as they develop, your red blood cells will actually get rid of its nucleus. So there are erythrocytes that get rid of their nucleus. If you kind of take a look at it, you don't really see nuclear structures, right? And that's partially because they've already gotten rid of their nuclear structure in this case. So they're already developed erythrocytes. Okay. And so they're just basically vessels for oxygen delivery. Okay. So there's one thing I wanted to say before we move on from cartilage. So another connective tissue is the bone itself. The bone is really considered the connective tissue, and it's the hardest connective tissue that we have. Okay, let's see. So we have our muscle tissues. So we have skeletal muscle tissues, and that you guys can kind of see. These guys are they're going to be they're all pretty much fibrous. So you're going to notice that they're all they're going to have stratigation, and then they're also going to be they're nucleated on the periphery. So if you look where they're nucleated at, in other words, they're strand-like, right? And then you also see the nucleus on the periphery. And in this case, you can kind of see that multinucleation, right? We're multinucleated. Okay, smooth muscle, they're gonna actually have a single nucleus. And then you're not gonna see those nice stratified lines. So you're not gonna get those nice little stripe separations. So this is smooth muscle. This guy is skeletal muscle. And then this guy is cardiac muscle. And so you can kind of see it's stratiated, and then you have single nuclei between the fibers. Okay, multinucleated, single nuclei, single nuclei. And you guys, and look how the nuclei are oriented between the stratiation. So, make sense? This one is not stratiated. Okay. Simple. Okay. Let's see. There was something that I wanted to say. So what would be the function of skeletal muscle?
To protect the organs.
Okay, skeletal muscle. So we assume that this muscle is going to be associated with what?
The bones.
It's going to be associated with the skeleton, right? And I keep
Yeah.
Okay, so it's going to be associated with bone. So why would we have muscle associated with bone? So you said one. You said first thing you said was protect the organ, right?
Yes.
Okay, because we don't want our bones rubbing up against our organs, right? Our bones are supposed to be an outer protective layer, so it's kind of protect the organs from the bones themselves. Okay, what else? What else?
Produce heat.
Okay, produce heat. Okay. Okay. And one other major thing.
And then somebody else commented movement.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Good job. Those flashcards, right? Okay, what about smooth muscle? What is that for?
The digestive.
It regulates flow of blood in the arteries, right?
Okay. And then somebody said digestive. Okay, so what do you mean by that? So
That it forms the component.
you're right about what you're saying, but so think about it. So when we eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
first thing we got to chew and all that good stuff, right? And then we
Mhm.
have to kind of get that food to go down, right?
Yes.
Down our throat. So those muscles down here, a lot of those are smooth muscles, right? So then it's needed for, in a sense, it is digested, but it's that initial part, the movement of foods, right?
Yes.
Okay. What else? Do you guys think about breathing?
No.
It maintains pressure.
Maintains pressure. Okay. So when we talk about, so when we think about breathing, right? We don't think about it. So is it voluntary or is it involuntary?
Involuntary.
Involuntary. So all of your involuntary movement, and we should specify this guy's for voluntary. So involuntary movement. And then what about cardiac muscle?
Pumps blood.
Pumps blood. Got one really good job. These other guys have a lot to take up, right?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. We're at 11 o'clock. Okay. So today we're doing a lab. I'm gonna put the lab. I didn't get a chance to put it up, so I'm gonna put it up right now. Is it okay if? Okay. So I will see you guys in 10 minutes.